Hey everybody, this is Pete Bartolozzi welcoming you to another broadcast. Here again, we're continuing with Daniel and Revelation, and we are now to chapter 20 in Revelation. We finished talking about the judgment seat of Christ at the end of chapter 20. I did say we were in 20. We're in 21. I think I said that. But in the end of chapter 20, we the great white throne judgment. And of course, we wanted to give the proper perspective that God has concerning this, and not that God's sending people to hell as much as people are. Official judgment has to be made, but it's based upon their own choices. People chose to go there, and as much as Jesus, probably would love to say, "Go ahead, enter my joy," he can't, because they chose to remain children of the devil by rejecting uh, uh, God's provision for mankind to become the family of God, to become children of God through what the Lord Jesus Christ did for us. And of course, Jesus said, "No man comes to the Father but by me." And so we gotta have the right perspective. It's not God just saying, "You rejected my son, go to hell." You rejected my son, so I ain't gonna let you in heaven. It's not a matter of letting or not letting. It's a matter of their choice. And that's why evangelism is so important in getting the gospel out there. And so anyway, um, let's go to 21 before I start rambling on too much more with that. Chapter 21 of Revelation, verse 1, he says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth." It seemed like the scene changes again. It's no longer the great white throne judgment, but he says, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and the sea is no more." And it seems like this is the only statement made to that effect. This is kind of this scene just had one simple verse to describe "I saw," and he wasn't just saying "I heard about," he told me about, but he said I actually saw the new heaven and the new earth, and God had shown it to him, so he knows what it looked like. And he said, "For the first heaven and first earth were passed away, and the sea is no more." Now the King James says, "And there was no more sea." And because of that, a lot of people say, well, the new heaven, new earth won't have any seas or oceans or anything. But it doesn't say no more seas, but no more sea. So really, when I look at the Greek, the best way to translate this, I believe, is "and the sea was no more." It is the definite, the King James says, "and there was no more sea," but the definite article is there, the word "the," and says "the sea was no more." And it almost seems to me, and so when it says "the sea," it's specifically referring to a particular sea. And when you really think about it, since the backdrop of all end time prophecy is the Mediterranean Sea, it seems very clear that he's referring to the Mediterranean Sea and saying in this new heaven and new earth, there's no more Mediterranean Sea. And so, and not saying all the seas of the world, didn't say that there's no more seas, implying no more oceans or anything like that, but that the sea is no more. And so again, implying that there's no Mediterranean Sea, which also gives the idea that what he saw is going to look similar to what we have right now. Otherwise, how we know what's missing? If it looked entirely different, then you wouldn't know whether something was missing or not. So it implies it may very well be pretty much the same when you think of that. But then right away, the scene changes again in verse 2 and says, "And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared like a bride, prepared like as a bride, prepared for her husband." Now, the scene's starting to change a lot quicker here in 21 and 22, because we're getting not only gotten past the tribulation period, the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy, but also past the millennial reign. And now he's just given a bunch of little information right here at the end about what's happening after the millennial reign. No details whatsoever concerning all of these things, just letting them know what's going to happen after that in general. But that's why the scenes will change rather quickly, just bringing out several things. And so that's why the new heaven, new earth, I saw it. But that's about all he said about it. It's all I know. There's no more sea. I just noticed that. So maybe it was hard for him to describe what he saw entirely, but he said he saw it. So that at least revealed to us that there is a new heaven and new earth. And it does seem that, that after the old was was destroyed. Obviously, the news going to come after that. But with the great white throne judgment, making the statement about from whose face the earth and the heavens fled. Excuse me, the heaven fled. That was probably an interlude between the two. So maybe after the great white throne judgment, then right away he creates the new heaven and new earth for all those who chose to follow him. We will go into that. What life is going to be like after that, what all is going to take place and everything. No details are given. So like me, we're all just going to have to wait till we get there and we'll find out. But I'm convinced in following God, we're not going to be disappointed. So again, we get to verse 2, and it says, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared like as a bride prepared for her husband. Now, this, and along with some other statements we're going to be looking at here concerning the New Jerusalem, there's a quick little interlude here, and it gets right back into the New Jerusalem again. People are saying that the city is the bride. Well, this is one of the things they go to, but I want you to take note. It says prepared like as a bride. And the Greek has that phrase like as. It is a comparison. It is a word of comparison. It is not saying the city is the bride. It is said she is prepared like as a bride. So as a comparison here, it is not an actual statement of this is the bride. It is not. And we'll look at some other things as well concerning that. And verse 3 says, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God will be with them and be their God. And then verse 4, it says, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall no longer be death, sorrow, crying, neither shall there be any more toil, for the former things are passed away. So as we get into this New Jerusalem, there's going to be all tears. Everything about tears will be gone. There may be some tears of the judgment seat of Christ, but that'll all be gone. Some tears from the great white throne judgment. We may see some family and some friends that ended up going to hell and rejecting Jesus. So we'll probably have some tears from that time as well. But once that's over and we get into this new heaven, new earth, we get into this New Jerusalem. Of course, I guess that does imply that the New Jerusalem doesn't come until the new heaven and new earth. That's not necessarily the case. Since you're reading this after the phrase new heaven and new earth, many people do believe that. But scenes are changing. And when scenes change, again, this is not lineal thinking. All these scenes are not chronological. Okay, within each scene, things go chronologically, but each scene is not chronological one after another. They actually build on top of each other, build with holistic thinking, which just kind of shows things that simultaneously go on. There's indications that the New Jerusalem will most likely be there during the Millennial Reign. Because of the way these two verses are, many believe it's not going to come until the new heaven and new earth, because they're thinking chronologically. And I'm not saying it absolutely won't be, and if you believe it's coming during the new heaven, new earth, or believe it's coming during the millennial reign, I tend to favor during the millennial reign, but it's not worth debate over, okay, when it comes. We all can agree on the fact that he's making there's a new Jerusalem, and we're all going to be a part of that, okay? We can all at least agree on that, whether it comes, millennium or new heaven and new earth. I don't want to create debate over that. Like I said, I tend to favor that it will be during the millennial reign that we will see the New Jerusalem. Let's see. So let's like I said, let's not make debate over that. And then there's a kind of like an interlude of an exhortation here, and says, and he who sits upon the throne said, behold, I make all things new. And he says to me, write, because these words are faithful and true. And he said to me, they have been done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And I will give to him who is thirsty of the fountain of the water of life freely. Well, we know Jesus is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, literally the Aleph and Tav, but I'm not getting into that right here. But notice how he says, the Greek is past tense. They have been done. We're still looking for these things to be fulfilled. But when he spoke to me, he said, they have been done. God, who inhabits time, speaks of these things as having already been done. Or you can literally say, having already been established. But things need, somebody said, well, why don't you just go to the end? Why do we do all this? Because men still need to make their choices and, for lack of a better term, play things out for God to righteously judge them and not judge them for what they hadn't done. He needs to judge them for what they had done. That's why it says, according to their works, they will be rewarded. So even though he knows the future and knows the decisions men make, they still have to go through making those decisions. They still have to go through the process of that, because it's not righteous to judge them for what they hadn't done, but he knows they would. He can only judge them for what they actually have done. And so that's why all this is a time for them to, this time was created here in the earth for man to make his choice. And that's what we're here for. That's why once we leave this life, it's too late. We're here in this earth, in this created realm, for the purpose of making our choice. And again, choice is paramount to God. So and then he says in verse 7, he who overcomes will inherit all things, and I will be to him God, and he will be a son to me. Again, this continues with the letters to the churches. At the end of all the letters to the churches, he gives promises to the overcomer. Here again, this is a general statement concerning the promise to an overcomer, that he will inherit all things. I will be God to him, and he will be a son unto me. But it says to the fearful and unbelieving, who indeed, having become abominable murderers and fornicators and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part in the lake of fire, which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. So we go with him, but all the others go to the lake of fire, the second death. Now it seems like things change back again after this little interlude. And talking about the New Jerusalem, it says, and one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls, which were full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, come, and I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit with a great high mountain, and showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Now, this is one, especially the way this is worded, many people think, well, see, the bride, it's the city. All right, but you got to understand that first of all, it said the first verse said it was prepared like as a bride. Wasn't saying it was a bride or was the bride, but simply a comparison of like as. But however, having this view, thinking that because of the way it's worded, having this view comes from our Western way of thinking. And we have done great injustice a lot of times endeavoring to interpret the Bible based upon the way we think here in the West, here in America specifically, and trying to interpret it the way we think here. Well, God didn't say things to them back then according to the way we think today in our time. They wouldn't have understood it. He spoke to them the way they thought in their time, so they understood it. So we need to understand that. You see, the Bible was written, for lack of a better term, an Eastern way of thinking. It wasn't written to those of us in the West of our day. It was written to those of the East of their day, kind of thinking that for the most part still does exist to this day. And so but even more accurately than just Eastern way of thinking, it is more accurately to say it is a Hebraistic way of thinking, because these were Jews that had gotten saved who were writing all this stuff in the New Testament. They didn't have the Bible as we have it today, of the New Testament portion of the Bible anyway. They only had the Old Testament portion. They had the Hebrew scriptures. And so they were often taking what they knew from the Hebrew, and of course they were teaching to a people in the common language of their day, which was Greek of that day. And so a lot of the expressions and the idioms and so on from the Hebrew were endeavoring to be communicated through that common language of the day, and what became known as in the New Testament books. And so a lot of those idioms are endeavoring to be expressed in the Greek, and you got to understand that when we see that. Otherwise, we'll misunderstand it. A lot of people refer to these as Hebraisms. And so the New Testament is full of what are called Hebraisms, expressions and idioms and things from the Hebrew language, endeavoring to be expressed into another language that was more common in that day. And so we got to be cautious about trying to judge things based upon the way we think here. The Hebrew idiom here is that the New Jerusalem represents those who inhabit it. Now, as we do, referring to a city can refer to the structure of the city, the buildings, the houses, the marketplace, the boundaries, etc., etc. But the name of a city was used often to speak of the people who inhabit the city. For instance, in Luke chapter 13, verse 34 through 35, Jesus crying out, lamenting out, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, which kills the prophets and stones them that are sent unto you. How oft would I have gathered your children together, and a hen does her brood under her wings, and you would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. And verily I say unto you, you shall not see me until the time come when you shall say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now I want you to notice that. He's crying to Jerusalem, Jerusalem, oh, you who killed the prophets. Well, it wasn't the structures and the streets and the boundaries that killed the prophets. It was the people who inhabited the city. I like what Perry, so it's a Hebrew expression here. Perry Stone made a comment one time referring to the city as being the groom's wedding gift to the bride. And so that's why he said, let me show you. See, when he showed him the city, he was speaking of the people who would inhabit her. Another thing to take note to, in Jesus stated in John chapter 14, verses 2 and 3, he said, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. If the New Jerusalem were the bride, then Jesus would have said, I go to prepare a place for me. He didn't say that. We also have another Hebrew expression here. Jesus is saying, I go to prepare a place for you, that when I come, I will receive you to myself, so that you would be with me, is expressing the way a Jewish wedding is done. The man would go and prepare a place for his bride, and when it was ready, he would go and get her and take her to that place where they would remain together for the rest of their lives. You see, this was an idea. But I want you to notice something. In Revelation chapter 19, verse 7, it said, the bride has made herself ready. I want you to notice that. The bride makes herself ready. But the city, Jesus said, I go to prepare a place for you. The city does not make itself ready. Jesus does. It's like the Father is the master designer, and Jesus is the master general contractor overseeing the building of this city, and he's preparing it for his bride. This is another reason why I believe it'll be because I believe the wedding supper of the Lamb, the marriage supper of the Lamb, would be during that 7-year period that we're in heaven while the tribulation is going on down in the earth. And that's why I believe that's another reason why I tend to favor that the city will be there during the Millennial Reign, because after the celebration and everything, then we go and are brought into the city that he has prepared for his bride. And that's one of the reasons why I do that. We also got to take note. He said, I go to prepare the place, but the bride makes herself ready. Well, the bride is the glorious church, and the glorious church makes herself ready. So the church is the bride, not the city. This is kind of a Hebrew expression of hamakom, what is called hamakom, where Jesus is saying, I'm going to prepare a place, almost expressing the place for you, that I prepare for you. And the idea of hamakom comes, first of all, out of Deuteronomy chapter 12. It says, but when you go over the Jordan and dwell in the land that the Lord your God gives you to inherit, and when he gives you rest from all your enemies round about, you shall dwell in safety. Then there shall be the place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. There you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes, your heave offerings of your hands, and all your choice vows which you vow to the Lord. Now the King James says, that he says, I will choose a place. The Hebrew expresses, I will prepare the place, or I will choose, the place in the land of Israel where all of this will take place. And so the phrase, the place, is hamakom. Ha, meaning the, makom, being place. I will choose the place in Israel, that where you will bring all your offerings and so on, as it said. In 2 Chronicles chapter 17, David desires to build a house for the Ark of the Covenant. In verse 9, God said, I will ordain a place, literally expressing the place, for my people Israel. See, David was desiring to know the place. See, as Israel, they knew what was said to Moses about, I will choose a place out. But in David's time, that place had not yet been chosen. And he was desiring to know that place. where God was going to choose, where they would build the temple, which is expressing they would build the temple where all their offerings and everything would be brought. David was desiring to know where that was. They were still in the tabernacle up to that time. And so David was looking for this. In 2 Chronicles 20 or 1 Chronicles 21, David sinned and God gave him the choice for punishment. He chose and reluctantly chose, and many people of Israel died. But God stopped the angel at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, or Aruna, depending upon which language you're pronouncing his name in. David purchased it from him and built an altar there and prepared sacrifices as offerings to the Lord. Now, verse 26 states that David called on the Lord, and he, the Lord, answered by fire that he sent down upon the altar, upon the offerings. Now, I want you to notice, it wasn't only with Elijah that God sent fire down on the sacrifices. He did it here first with David. And God sent the fire. He prepared the altar, the sacrifice, but he didn't set it on fire. He called upon the name of the Lord, and God answered by fire. David knew there was some reason the Lord stopped right there at that place, because that's where God wanted them to make and bring their offerings. So as the story continues in chapter 27, God answered by fire, and then David proclaimed, "This is the house of the Lord God, and this is the altar of burnt offerings for Israel." And that place is what we today call the Rock. And when the Muslims got a hold of it, put their dome over it, they call it the Dome of the Rock. That is the rock God chose to build the temple, where all the places, all the offerings and sacrifices were to be brought. That place. And so, immediately after this, the very next verse, David, even though he was not allowed by God to build the temple, he began preparing materials for the house of God to be built. And so after David's sin and great catastrophe, in David's repentance, the Lord revealed to David the place, Hamakom, for them. So what we're getting here in all of this, Jesus is saying, I go to prepare Hamakom for you. So there's another place for those of us in the New Covenant, and that place is the New Jerusalem. And so then in verse 11, it goes on and says, having the glory of God and her radiance, speaking of the city, having the glory of God and her radiance is like the most valuable stone, even like jasper stone, clear as crystal. Also having a great and high wall, having 12 gates, and all the gates 12 angels, and having the names inscribed, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. And then it talks about having 3 gates on the east, north, south, and west, and the wall of the city having 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And the one speaking with me had a golden reed, so that he could measure the city and its gates and its wall. And the city lies 4 square. Its length is the same as its width, and he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. So, what's a furlong? Furlong is not a term it's still an English word, but it's not a term we use anymore. A furlong is the measurement of 1/8 of our mile. Now, we usually don't talk in those terms anymore, but that's exactly what it is to this day. A furlong is 1/8 of a mile, of our mile. And so when you take 12,000 furlongs, 1/8 of our mile, it comes out to 1,500 miles square. However, you got to understand that in the Greek, it is actually the Greek word stadia, which was 1/8 of a Roman mile. And the thing is the Roman mile was just a little bit shorter than our mile. So when doing the math with the stadia, 12,000 stadia, and then translating that over in the Roman mile into our present day mile, it actually comes out to about 1,380 square miles. But if somebody wants to say 1,500 miles, that's fine. I think whether it's 1,500, 1,380, I think we all agree this is a massive, massive city that God is building. At this point, I'm gonna stick with the 1380, just knowing that it's the Greek word stadia for 1/8 of a Roman mile, and it says it's 1380 square miles, 1300 length as well as the width. So it's 1380 square miles, which, to give you an idea, I usually like to draw it up on the board, but right now things are kind of backward on my board. Just to get this forward, I had to draw it backward because I don't have the editing program right now. But anyway, that'll all be dealt with in time. To give you an idea about how the size of this, it's approximately the distance between the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains, and from the Canadian border down to Austin, Texas. That gives you the general idea, the approximate idea of how big in square miles this is. And then I was reading somewhere else about taking the amount of people in the earth today, and if you just put them shoulder to shoulder and front to back, we can put them in an area the size of New York City. And everybody in the world, the billions. Of course, now there's since that article was made, there's probably another billion in the earth, so maybe a little bit more than that. But see, there's plenty of room in this earth. If the millennial reign, at the end of the millennial reign, since there's not going to be any more death during the time of the millennium, that means nobody's going to die. That means everybody of the nations anyway. Of course, we're not going to die because we got our glorified bodies and everything. But all the nations in the earth, the people that don't have glorified bodies that we'll rule and reign over, they'll continue out throughout the earth for those 1,000 years, which means those people will actually get past the age of Methuselah by the end of the millennial reign. And as they're marrying and having children and stuff, I dare say, excuse me, I'm trying to avoid doing that. But anyway, by the end of the millennium, there's going to be multiplied times more people in the earth by then than there is now. And so people who are saying that the earth is overpopulated now, there ain't no way it's overpopulated, because God made it to be able to handle the population that's going to be at the end of the millennium, which is multiplied times more now. It's just a satanic idea, because they cannot, the more people there are, the less they can control people. They want to reduce the population to a controllable level because they want to be able to control people. And they also are part of Satan. Killing people is what he loves to do. He is the author of death. So there's no way that we're having this problem of overpopulation in the earth. They've been saying that for a long time. Even go back to the old story about, the Christmas Carol with Scrooge and everything, saying, get rid of the excess population. Well, they didn't have as much population then as they do now, which means they've been preaching this for a long time, and it's a bunch of nonsense. It is a satanic agenda. But this city is huge. And there's more than enough for, if everybody in the world got saved, there's more than enough to build a mansion for every single one of them in this city. And I don't have much time to get more into that right now. We'll continue with talking about the city in the next broadcast as we're coming to an end of this one. So we'll take up here. And until then, be blessed.